and have been demonstrated to be highly correlated with success of students. So we are going to focus today on goal number 2, which is about setting goals and then monitoring the progress toward those goals. And so we're not just thinking about the goals that the adults in the program are setting, the teachers, the principals, the counselors, but also supporting students in setting their own goals and helping them to track their progress and celebrating their progress with them. Go ahead.
Okay.
So today we're going to look at what the elements are that sustain an effective MTSS program. So what are the components of the program that is going to really support teachers and students and parents to work together for the success of the student? And then what data will we examine to indicate our positive growth? And then what are the impacts of shared leadership and decision making? So why is it that we do this work collaboratively and look at data together and make decisions together for our students? Go ahead.
Okay.
So again, MTSS is a system of supports. It's a prevention approach. So we're looking at what we can do proactively to support students, and we want to improve the outcomes of every student. So part of the systemic approach is that no students get become invisible because we're following up on students in a very systemic way. And we want to connect families, schools, and communities together to do this work. The most important part is that multi-tiered layered system. So there's a continuum of evidence-based practices or interventions or supports that we're providing for students. And we know that by tracking what's working for students, we can continue to do more of that. But also when we see that a student isn't growing as expected, then we can add something in the next layer, the next tier. And those practices are applied by student in the classroom. But then we also use the data that we collect to make decisions at the school, district, region, and even state level. So when we know that something is working, for example, the Colorado Department of Education might invest more funds in professional development around that work and providing resources for schools and districts. So there are 5 essential elements that make up a successful MTSS system, and we're going to start in the upper right corner where it says team-driven shared leadership. And so when teams work together in, for example, professional learning communities or grade level teams to talk about what's working and what's working for whom, and we share the leadership, which means that everyone's voice has a place and that everyone who is working with that student has a place to, or has opportunity to offer their best thinking and their expertise in creating a solution for that student. The second component is data-based problem solving and decision making. So although we have incredible intuitions as teachers, as educators, we want to make sure that we're also aligning the data, and that we're looking at what the data is telling us, and not just standardized testing data, but behavior data, attendance data, student perceptions of school climate. There are multi-tiered databases as well that we want to look at, and places where we can find out what's happening with students. The next one is a layered continuum of support, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and look at kind of a diagram of a layered continuum. But what it means is that we know what happens next. We know what to do if the supports that we're offering now are not working or are not working as expected. Evidence-based practices, we know that those are practices that have been demonstrated to have a high correlation with student success and with getting the outcomes that we're hoping to get. And then finally, the family, school, and community partnering. We want to make sure that the family is included in the conversation, that they are getting the support that they need to help their students, and that they support the teachers in the school, because families know their children and they can give us really important information about how to help their children. Okay? So this is the common icon for an MTSS model: the green tier 1, yellow tier 2, and red tier 3. And so we expect that most students will have their, as a matter of fact, 80 to 90% of students will have their needs met in our universal core, that green tier. That is what every child has access to. As students demonstrate that they need more support, we might pull from some targeted tier 2 supports, and we call that targeted support. When students are consistently not finding success, then we might move to tier 3. And we'll look at an example of those kinds of supports and interventions that are in each tier. And of course, those are fluid, and schools decide for themselves, or districts have schools work together to decide what practices are in each tier. But I do also want to point out that on the left side, we're not just talking about academic support. We're looking at behavior supports and academic supports simultaneously so that we create the ideal conditions for students to be successful. Okay, so here we're looking at kind of an unpacking of each tier. So obviously this is not a comprehensive list of all the possible interventions and supports and practices that might be in tier 1, but this is some work that was done collaboratively across several schools, and we were looking at what would be social emotional learning supports that might be in tier 1 in a school. And so we know that every child in this, if this was the MTSS resource bank, we know that in this school, every child was getting an opportunity to participate in curriculum that was helping them with SEL competencies. They would be learning how to reset themselves using mindfulness practices. They would have an advocate and be getting daily check-ins. So as we support all students and we see that these core practices are supporting up 80 to 90% of our kids, then we know that we've got a solid and a strong core. Many schools are constantly revisiting their tier 1 and adding practices, sometimes even pulling some of the supports that used to be tier 2 supports, and making sure that all children get a chance. For example, to do some art therapy during the day if it's a stressful time of year, or to listen to music and get all of the benefits that music can offer to us. Okay, so right now we're going to go into breakout rooms, and you want to take that instruction, Kat or Ellen?
Ellen, do you want to stay here or?
Lisa, I'm thinking because so we have Tracy and Adriana with us. So I'm thinking if it's okay with you, we could just stay in this group.
Perfect.
Just work together.
That's actually, yep.
Great.
And I had a request also, if we could. I work with Adriana up at Wiggins, and she is under the Education Stability Grant. So they are working with, she's a new advocate with the group, and they are working with students who are highly mobile, so foster care, migrant students. And she is just going to start taking on as a tier 2 in the small groups. I'm not familiar what Tracy's working with, but maybe we can tailor it a little bit and really do some interventions helping with attendance. If that wouldn't matter, any other, or at least throw that in as part of it, because I think that would really help. And then if Tracy had a topic that was specific to what she wanted or would be helpful, maybe we could add that in here too, and then put all our brains together in one big group.
Awesome. So a consulting around our consulting session around attendance, improving attendance for students who are transitional.
Yes.
Okay, so what would be great is to put the triangle with the interventions back on the screen.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the things that we realize when we do have children that are coming into our classroom, and we know it's a season that we have them with us, and of course that's true for all of our students, but for some students, like students who are in foster care, or students whose families are working in the seasons in different states of the United States, or families that are under a certain kind of stress or crisis in terms of their jobs or other changes in their family structure. And so one of the ways that we can support children who we know we just have this moment with is to give them practices that they can drive. So if every time we do mindfulness to settle down, to kind of get back in touch with the present and try to take away some of the fear of the future or some of the anxiety from events in the past. If we're always telling them, okay, now we're going to breathe and I'll lead it and I'm going to count to 4, then we are creating a situation where when the student leaves our care, they have to kind of start over again with what's available to them. The other piece I want to say is that when we are able to know our children well enough to understand what they need, and Tracy, I know that I'm talking to someone who has experience in this area and is making wise decisions and kind and caring and compassionate decisions for our children. When we create that kind, compassionate, inclusive environment, and the most important aspect of that is that the child feels seen. And so when we take that moment just with that child, looking at them in the eyes, asking them how they are, asking them if there's something that they need, asking them if they would like to, which activity they would like the whole class to do together, without calling them out and making them feel like, well, they're getting some kind of a separate intervention because they're different, but making sure that there's a one-to-one with every child, but really being aware of how that child is showing up, their stance for stress, their connection with other children, and to be able to teach to all children, here's something that you can do at home. So going to a happy place, for example, you know, that today I noticed at recess there was a lot of strife between you guys. You were playing a game and then you weren't, and some of you were still, it seemed like you were a little bit upset with each other. Why don't we take a moment and let's remember the activity where we go to our place where we feel peace? Michael, do you want to tell us what your place of peace is? The beach. Yeah, a lot of people feel peaceful when they walk on the beach. How about you, Susan? Are you thinking about some special place that you in your room? Okay, that's awesome. Someone else just shouts out, with my dog, and you're thinking, you know what, right now I'm not going to worry about behavior or saying you didn't raise your hand or how do you talked over. Just, yes, sometimes pets can bring that sense of peace. So why don't we all just take a minute and you take yourself to your place of peace. And remember our 4-count breathing. So you do that in your head, and I'll set the timer for 30 seconds. So don't mean to belabor that conversation, but the purposeful, intentional asking the children to take themselves there, reminding the children that they can do their own 4-count breathing. And so when they are leaving, and I had a 2nd grade classroom that was very transient. I had public housing nearby, and a lot of foster children also, actually 3 out of 30 of my ones I started the year, and 4 by the time the year ended were in foster care, moving in and moving out. So to be able to, when it's time for them to leave, to have a celebration of them and have every child tell them, write down on a paper that they can take with them, but then tell them out loud what they appreciate about them, why I like being your friend, what I enjoyed about being with you, about having you in my class. And then I always had stuffed animals. I don't know what grade levels you teach. Tracy, can you chat or say what grade levels you teach? Do you know, Anna?
I'm not sure for Tracy. Adriana is going to do K-12. So
Okay.
she is our new advocate. So she is going to, in a couple weeks, just start her first small groups. But could probably use a little more support in the middle and high school versus the elementary piece of learning how to build those connections when it's such limited time, or maybe gets to see them once a week. So wanting to do that. She has such amazing relationships already though with them and does really well with the whole family. But moving into these actual lessons of, you know, like you said, creating a safe space in her own group or doing a lesson for the activity of celebrating, and all those little ideas I think would be super helpful of just what to do with when she has that time. And she's learning the GSN curriculum right now, but just all those little pieces you're saying right now are perfect.
Well, something else you reminded me of, Anna, was that tokens, especially in older children, are really important. So it could be a card that each student makes, and then their friends sign it or say something good about them, and you can laminate it for them. They can have it in their pocket. One story that I heard was about a young man, I think he was about 11, when he was having a birthday party, and the family was scattered a lot, and there were crises in the family often, but this was his day. He was having a birthday party. But one of the neighbors called the police and said they thought that there were drugs going in and out of that house, and it was bad timing because the police showed up on his birthday, arrested the parents. The other children's parents were called, and because that child's parents had been taken into custody, that child was put in the police car. And the policeman was driving him to the children's shelter. And the policeman was someone who'd been trained in compassion and also innately empathetic. And he said, "Whose birthday was it at that house where I came and got you?" And he said, "That was my birthday." He said, "I'm 11 today." And the policeman said, "Oof, not a good birthday." And the little boy shook his head. And the policeman reached in his pocket and took a coin out and said, "You know what? This is my lucky coin, and I've had this for a long, long time. And I want to give it to you because whenever I feel sad or I don't have enough confidence that something good is going to happen, I don't feel positive about the future, I just pull out this coin and hold it and rub it, and it just makes me feel better, like I feel more calm." And the reason and the little boy took the coin and put it in his pocket. The reason I know that story is when that little boy was 28 years old, he got an award from an organization, a nonprofit organization. And as the people were clapping and he came up, he said, "I want to thank the police officer whose name I don't know." And he reached in his pocket and took out that coin and showed everyone that he had held on to that for 20 years and probably beyond, that meant so much to him. And, you know, when we get down on our knee and we say something nice, and we are able to look a student in the eye or come up eye to eye with one of our older students, and we give them a positive impression of themselves, that's a token. But when you can put it into something they can take with them, it has meaning because there's so few things in some lives that give them that positive piece. So I don't know if you all create something together, an artifact or something like that, but then give it meaning, symbolism, ritual. It's almost lost in American culture, but it does make a difference. And with my younger children, I actually had a shelf of read to me buddies, and so I would go to the many, many different Goodwills and find the most shiny stuffed animals. I'd wash them all and then brush them with a brush, and I had new ones all the time. And the reason is because oftentimes kids got to take them home and they didn't come back, and that was fine with me. But if something hard was going on, a child came to me and whispered to me, I would say, "Do you need a friend? Do you want to pick one of the animals and take them home with you in your backpack?" Sometimes we wouldn't have the rest of the class in there. I'd say, "Come back at lunch." We'd zip them in the backpack, and we wouldn't say where the tiger went or the teddy bear went. But many, many times, children said, "Yes, I would love to have one to take home." So those kinds of things make a difference. They seem small. And we don't know when the last day is. That's the other thing. I had children who told me, "Good morning," and the next thing I know, I got a call from the office, "Please pack this child's backpack, they're going home today." And then they would say, "Pack everything." And I would not have a moment to have thought about what to do. And so I had other ways, little cards that had the classroom sayings that we were part of the 7 Habits group, and we had these laminated cards that had those sayings, and I would just take one of those and say, "You know, you're one of the people who always thinks win-win. You always make friends and help them. I'm going to give you this win-win card," something to give them on that last day. One of the other pieces of this SEL curriculum that we know makes a difference when children go into other contexts is the ability to resolve conflict and to make friends. And so those times in the circle where they learn to listen to one another and they learn to respond with empathy, you've given them the gift of being able to make friends and to be able to create relationships more quickly than an average child, because they'll be a child who can listen and ask questions and care about the other child. So as we're teaching in circles, if someone feels sad, instead of always taking it upon yourself to be the one who extends the sympathy to maybe with a child who you know is starting to develop those skills to say, you know what, I noticed Michael was feeling bad today. Do you want to just go talk to him for a minute? Maybe you can make him feel better. So giving them opportunities to support others gives them a skill that's going to make them welcome in the new place that they go to. How about the rest of my colleagues on the phone? Do you all have some ideas and suggestions?
And Lisa, it looks like Tracy just responded. So she's 7 through 12 from Peyton.
Okay.
And Tracy,
great.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe she's in like a college and career counseling role. And she also just said, we do not have very many transient students at our school. We do have a small amount of moving in with extended families due to the current cost of housing. I might start a welcome cart for them. College advisor.
Awesome.
Thanks, Tracy.
That's awesome. And teaching students, you know, to stop and take a moment to say hello. If we have a guest in the room, if we do get a new student, you know, let's take a moment. It's okay to take 15 minutes out of math for each student to say hello, to say something about themselves, and to say welcome. You might have taught the children several different languages to say welcome in, and choose a language and tell them welcome. Who would like to be the ambassador today? And maybe you've already chosen someone for that student. So we make students feel welcome, but we're also teaching them how to create new relationships themselves, the ways that we've already taught students to be ambassadors. And, you know, I was a principal of a high school that was it's called the Denver Street School, and there are street schools now all over the country. But what we found out oftentimes, even a 16 or 18-year-old who's come in from a life of change and sometimes chaos and sometimes neglect, they need those moments to be taught some of the things that we're teaching our second graders, right? To say please, to let someone else go in front of you. It's not a race, and there's enough food for everyone. And so let's practice that. Why don't you let 2 people go in front of you today? You know, that kind of practice at being a person that others want to be around. We can start that at any age.
Tracy just mentioned in the chat, I actually get an hour for registrations, and I dig for info to establish strengths, weaknesses, comfort zones, and special needs. It's the upside to not having register.
That's awesome. Because you're getting to know that student, you're able to serve them well. You're able to do special things for them that are going to meet them right where they are. That's awesome that you take the time for that. So let's go ahead and just take a real quick look at this list. Let's make this available to everyone who's on the call so that this can be a starting place. You may find that in Tier 1 on our list, the list that we created with other schools, you might not find more than 3 or 4 things that you do at your school or that you think are important enough to be in Tier 1, but it gives you a starting place and a conversation starter so that you can ask about, you know, how might role play fit into our Tier 1? Is that something you use in your classroom? What might that look like? So if there's something difficult that you know students are struggling with, introducing themselves to someone or shaking hands or being able to ask for help when they need it, to have a role play when there isn't a need, when it's not all about, you know, how uncomfortable I feel because already I'm asking for something, but we role play and we help each other with the language, and students can do it in groups so that everyone gets to role play at once. But as you look at this list and find those things, you might define for yourself, maybe with other team members at your school, what does that look like in our school? What does it mean to you? And how can we all learn how to use, for example, role play in our classrooms? Because it helps our students in a non-threatening situation to practice skills that they're going to be able to use in a situation that maybe does create some stress. What we've practiced, we're more readily able to go to. So anyway, I hope that this list might be useful to you in creating your own list. Also, if there's any practices on here that intrigue you, but you're not sure what they mean, feel free to contact Ellen or whoever your contact is here, and we'll make sure you get some information back. about what that might look like and what that practice entails. Oh, this is a really awesome site. Do you guys use this at your schools? Interventioncentral.org. Can you click on it, Ellen?
Yeah, of course. Let's see.
Anna, do you want to talk about how your school used this resource?
I had to unmute myself. Spacebar wasn't working. Yep, when GSN gave me this resource, I went through there and was really excited because pretty much all of it was free. So that was a big one because we seem to focus so much on the academic part, and we were leaving our behavior part second, when in reality we had to flip-flop that and put most of our weight on the behavior and get control of supporting all our students that way, and then look at the academics. So it took us a little while to learn that. But up top they have those behavior interventions, and they also have, Ellen, can you see up there? Would you be able to click on that part?
Yep.
Yep.
This one?
So they have, yep. So they have behavior interventions. Oops.
Oh, that was weird.
I think we lost that one. But this was a great page and such a great resource too, because we could go through the age group, something specific we needed. We reference it a lot with our special education students too, who needed more support. I used a lot with the motivation and rewards, so we could stay positive with everything. Then they also had a bunch of free videos too that we'd pull out in staff meetings or just smaller MTSS meetings, just to go through there of like, how can we recognize what the students are doing and reward them for all the great things they're doing, instead of just, here's something wrong and this is how we got to fix it. So it helped us change our mindset. We could go back through and it was all these resources put in one. So this would be such a great one for any age group or area that you're looking for. But the behavior one really is what made a big turning one for us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anna.
Yep.
So to populate your MTSS tiers, this is a great resource. So you can go right to what is going on with your kids, what you think your weakness is, and maybe go and just read some of the behavior interventions that have been populated on this site.
Okay.
So in creating an MTSS system, it's really great to start with where you are. So these are 2 questions that can help you as a team identify what you're doing now, and so what's working, what maybe needs to be changed, what you maybe need to keep doing, what you may want to stop doing, and then where you can enrich your program, what the kind of gaps are. So how does our school or program identify and support students who are struggling or at risk, and then how are students' needs prioritized? Do behavior or academic challenges come first? And that's a real conversation starter, especially for leadership, because oftentimes leaders will say, you know, you really need to do one or do the other. And honestly, it does go together, but if a student isn't in an ideal state for learning, they will not learn as powerfully. One of the best behavior support strategies, though, is just really engaging, exciting, interesting instruction, right? So when you're teaching in a way that gets students captivated, they forget that they're mad at each other, or they forget that their tummies are hungry, or they forget that they came in already angry at something that happened at home. So it works together. So the ways that you shape your academic invitations to kids and create opportunities for them to engage themselves and to work together, that can really support student learning even when a student is struggling socially and emotionally. Of course, if you create an environment where students feel safe, no matter what's happened at home, they have a minute to kind of get reset. They hear something positive from you or from each other because you set up your social emotional learning program to launch your day or to make sure that kids have an opportunity for positive input. And so I think it's kind of a rhetorical question. It's kind of a trick question because both are so critical. And it doesn't mean that we ever, and I was a high school math teacher for a time, I just could never prioritize a student's math instruction over the heartbreak that they were feeling. But I could certainly support them through it. You know, I see you. I see that you're struggling. Let's plan to talk after class. Or do you have a friend that maybe we can make sure that you get a chance to talk with that friend at lunchtime? But right now we are doing this math. Do you think maybe it would take your mind off of what's hurting you? Do you want to try to just do a couple of problems so we encourage them back to the academics, because that's why we're here. We don't want to give them 3 hours off or say, never mind, you don't have to do this lesson because you're feeling bad. But acknowledging very, very intently and providing that empathy and that emotional support, and then making sure that we have ways of teaching that really are engaging. We're not just giving them a worksheet. Nobody does that anymore, do they? So yeah, what do you think? Anybody else want to weigh in on that? How are student needs prioritized, and do we look at behavior or academics first?
I am hoping Adriana is going to call in to my phone.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we got you. Yay.
Yeah. Sorry,
Good, I'm gonna put you on the spot then.
So, by prioritizing, I think behavior, it's my priority for students, especially because if we kind of correct the behavior or whatever they're going through, academic will come eventually. So yeah, so that's kind of my idea. It may be off from what you asked me, but in a specific, how do you get to those students who are they have kind of behavior issues, but they trust you, but they don't accept it, and sometimes they don't want to change it. How do you approach those students?
My favorite thing I've ever seen is give them 5, which is something that Bennett School District uses. Anna, do you want to talk about that? Because it begins with affirmation, and students listen when you're telling them something wonderful about themselves or how much you care about them. It just it catches them off guard. But do you want to talk about give them 5?
Sure, we use that quite a bit, and it's just different steps in any order. It doesn't matter. It's just kind of the way that you're having the conversation with the student. So I think often people go in and it's really easy for people to say, these are the expectations and what you did wrong, and then this is how we're going to fix it. That's just almost like that's what people do. And this one with the give them 5 is really making sure they understand the benefit of changing that behavior too, though. So it's like, you know, if someone's acting out in your group, or you had someone who's not kind to their friends, instead of saying we're losing friends, it could be, wouldn't it be so great if we were joined in this group and we could play this game with our friends? So it's kind of changing your wording and getting that buy-in, instead of you did this and here's the consequence. And then it also leads to kids finding their own solutions, because then if we keep, like Lisa's kind of mentioning earlier, if we're doing everything for them, once they're on their own, nothing's going to be applied. It doesn't follow through. So it's helping guide how they fix their own behaviors. And you're just kind of guiding along, getting all those pieces, but they can't leave the situation or leave the conversation with you or whatever it is they have to fix without really fixing it. So it's kind of like the restorative practices. It kind of sounds like of just fixing it, but putting it in the kids' hands. And Adriana, you have such amazing relationships with your kids and the families already.
I hope.
You do. Trust me. You absolutely.
Thank you. How do you do? Well, I think elementary kids, it's way easier because, you know, one of my plans was, okay, I give them stickers. You know about that, Anna. So every time that behavior is good, we give them 1 sticker. That we have, if they complete 5 stickers, so they will pick an activity they would like to do with me. We were playing football, baseball, and it works for elementary kids. What about middle schoolers or high schoolers? Can you give me like any example of how to approach them? You know, because especially high schoolers right now, we know kind of what they're going through, and like, I think give them 5. Do you think it will work with them as well?
We use the same conversations K-12 with
Okay.
ours, and it actually worked really well with the older. I think in the elementary, those conversations happen all the time with the age group. That's just what happens, and it was a little harder to get going in high school. But then it puts it back in then of not, this is your consequence, this is what will happen, but okay, you're going to have to tell me how you're going to fix it or what you want out of this so we can move forward, type of thing.
Okay.
If they hate this class or that teacher hates them or whatever the case may be, whatever their viewpoint, it's really having that conversation, understanding why and what they want to do to fix it. And then, how can I help you fix that? You really think this teacher is not happy with you? What can I do to come help you in that class? What can I, it's just offering and giving them that control is where we saw the best changes, at least at our school. As an asked Shirley, actually the same too, because I know you worked with some special education students, correct, Shirley?
Right.
And so some of the behavior pieces or any of the interventions that you've done have just kind of manage themselves, self-management and being heard and listened to. Because I think a lot of the kids or kids that would get sent to my office didn't have a connection with somebody, or we said, okay, use these 3 strategies. Well, they used them and it didn't work, so they're done now. So like just getting that bank or what else we can have available for them. And I agree that the high schoolers can be a little challenging. The independence is just different.
Right. And I would say also, I think one of the major components when it comes to middle and high school is you making that connection as a whole and building that trust from day one when school starts, even if they're not like in a group with you now. If you just, any of the kids you just see going down the hall, just speaking to them just because, just greeting them just because, and that makes a difference, because once you can create and establish a connection with all of the students that come into your face or around, then they know you care about them, and then they can trust you, and then they're more likely to open up and say, okay, this is what happened, because sometimes they do shut down because they're not able to get their side of the story out or whatever. Then they have to go to the principal or go to a buddy or just other things. So I think it's really important from day one to try and build those relationships with those students. And that'll take you really, really far. And again, giving them a little space in the beginning, because if they come to you frustrated and they're already shut down, they're not going to open right up to you. So in giving them 5 and just allowing them to have some space, and then let them know when you're ready to talk, I'm right here for you, and just, maybe in the meantime, and saying also, this is just here and now. This will pass. Tomorrow at this time, it's going to be totally different. You're going to be in a better place, and just letting them know this is what happened at this time, at this day, this moment, but tomorrow's a new day. We're not going to take these things with us, and just having them to apply that within their school realm. And then when they go to home to try and apply those things, and just, it's nothing's forever. I think that's the main component. Once they begin to trust you and really learn that you understand and you care about them, that's when everything, that behavior will start to go away, and then you can really focus on academics.
Yeah,
Shirley, you're reminding me that you have a training around walking in someone else's shoes.
Absolutely.
And when I hear you talk about what students need, I hear that perspective in your frame. You're thinking about how it feels to be walking in their shoes.
Absolutely.
Is there anything you can tell us about that training, about walking in someone else's shoes, that might be helpful, that where we can help all of our teachers to have that perspective, to begin to build that perspective?
Well, I think, first of all, sometimes it takes a lot of work to get the teacher to a certain point that they're willing to be open-minded to walk in the children's shoes, instead of being biased and have their own personal bias with everything that, oh, you're supposed to be perfect, or you're supposed to be this, when that's not really the real world. So what I do, we really do a mindfulness training, and I tell them, and I say, okay, think about the population in which you work with. And I have them close their eyes and various things like that. And we really go deep, and that's like, think about that child that you can't connect with. Now think about walking in their shoes. Now think about yesterday and what they may have gone through before they got to school this morning. So I really take them back, and we go deep with that mindset. And some of them, most of the time, they come forefront and say they really understand things better, looking at it at a different perspective than their own. But it takes some time. So with some of them, it takes time.
Thank you. That's really helpful. You want to go to the next slide, Ellen? We're probably kind of getting ready to wrap up.
Yep, we got about 15 minutes.
Okay. So what's interesting about the MTSS conversations is you move from this affective conversation that's about caring and empathy and relationships, and then you have to go back to the system, right? Like, what is the process? So these questions are about how could data, or what data do you review? So what clues are you going to look for, and where are you going to find those clues about what intervention students need? And, you know, it could just be the student's own story. It could be knowing that over this last year they've been in the office a certain number of times, or now they've just returned from a suspension. So what does that student need now, and how might the whole system support that student to be successful going forward? So these aren't questions really for us to answer today, but they're questions for schools to answer together. So just ideas of here are some ways that we can have an MTSS conversation that helps us get better. So the next question is, how are students accountable for their progress and success? And so we've kind of touched on this several times. Who's in charge here? Who has agency? And how do we give that agency to students so that they become accountable? And honestly, that first goal, or the first slide that we looked at, the 5 goals, goal number 2 was about helping students to track, and everyone in the system track their progress, look at their results, and set goals for where they want to be 6 months from now, or at the end of the year, or even tomorrow. And I love Shirley's admonition that, you know, today is not the culminating moment of your life. What's happening right now is going to feel different when we put space and time between what's happened today and the time when you think about it again, the time when we find solutions. I think there's a lot of good information in this slide set, and it's going to take some time to process it, you know, and I really love the idea of the shared leadership team that can look together at these questions and hear from each other and learn more about how to think about these questions and what we might do differently as a team within our school. So do we have more questions on another slide? Oh my goodness, we do. So in walking away, you know, just some more questions about, does our MTSS system have a design, have the richness, have the strength to support all kids? So here are some more questions just to examine your MTSS system. And the last question, how can we improve our process? What improvements can we make? And that's what we all should be thinking about as we get together as teams. You know, we're on a kind of a quest for continuous improvement. So Tracy says, many times students dig themselves into an academic hole and just need that one, as far as I can see, Ellen. What is the rest of the question?
Yeah, and just need that one adult to start a group email and make a plan. Secondary teachers often only look within their room.
Good point.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of hit the nail on the head of what MTSS is about. When we learn how to do something well, it gets scaled across the system. So the more we can have those conversations and report out, the more we all learn from each other's successes.
And I would like to add also the consistency in which we work with all children. You know what I mean? Because a lot of times the staff is not consistent in following the ladder, or, you know what I mean? You know, sometimes, now if it's an emergency, it's different. If it's a weapon or something involved, that's different. But I think consistency is one of the big things that I'm looking at with one of the schools I'm working with now. Everybody being consistent and staying on the same page and not just trying to deviate, they need to do things with fidelity and stay consistent with it. I think that's one of the major problems.
Mm-hmm.
Tracy
and Tracy just chatted that we need to keep the meeting going. the communication going far beyond the meeting. So in their school, shared Google Docs is helping them with that fidelity and that consistency.
Nice.
Because they're able to communicate consistently. So it's not like once a month we get together, but we can check a Google Doc. We might get a notification and go in and see, okay, this happened today. And this is what happened about it. Here's what our perspective is. So when you see that student, you're not blindsided and you know a little bit better what that student needs.
Right.
I think it's important in that part too, just like Tracy was saying, keeping that communication going. I think a lot of times everyone's so busy with everything, and you go and you do your MTSS meeting, or you do your IEP or ALP meeting, and you go there, plan sounds great, it's good, and then you touch base on it again 3 months later, or when it's the annual again, or all these other pieces, and you forget, or it falls on, you know, people like Tracy or Adriana and counselors and advocates of, oh, okay, those are their kids, they've got it. And so it's so hard, you know, like just thinking in your mind, okay, now I have these kids, here's my advocate, here's my para, here's this, then that kid's going to be good. And we forget with that constant conversation and going back to it and then keeping that whole team-based piece. And I've seen that's sometimes keeping the team together and continuous is almost similar challenges as it is with bringing community and whole families into. But just keeping it, and I think it's just busy and everyone's doing their job and you're doing your best that you can, but I don't know, sometimes it's hard to find that little balance. And I think that's going to start coming up with some of our advocates and things like that. So I don't know, just having that discussion or back in our mind all the time, I think is important.
Agreed. So what happens for our students when we work together that doesn't happen when we don't? You know, sometimes we don't know the impact of our choice not to collaborate, not to communicate, because we don't know what didn't happen, right? So when we work together, when we use and apply our system of supports, then good things happen for kids. And we need to be constantly aware of how the system is serving every child, who it's working for, and are there students that it's not working for. And that's where we really need to work together and make those adjustments so that every student is having the opportunity to learn, to become, you know, all they can be, to express themselves, their unique self, and to be seen for who they are. So there's this system that then supports us in who we show up to be, in our empathy, our support, our caring, our compassion. You can't create a system that will make us compassionate, right? And we can't mandate that response. But when the system is fluid and it supports us in our work, then we're much more able to serve our kids from the heart and from the technical aspect of, you know, where are they in math? What's happening with their intervention? What goals have they set? But we're always doing that through a frame of our relationships. And as Shirley said, it's one of the first things we focus on. And I can't remember if it was Adriana or Tracy who said to us, first thing I do is I find out about my students. As soon as I get there, I find out about their strengths. I find out about what motivates them, what their interests are. And that helps us within a system of supports to give students individual and customized support. So, hi, Angelina. It's good to see you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Hello.
Hello. So let's go and see what's on the next slide. So this is another aspect of the system itself, the more technical side. And this is a flowchart that came out of Bennett Elementary, and then we've made some adjustments to it for other schools. And there's some red things there that I think are like, you know, considerations that you might make as you create your own flowchart. The idea isn't that you grab this flowchart and you run with it in your school, but that there is a system that makes a safety net for kids wherever they are, So the first question at the very top, and you probably can't read what it says, but you can see it iconically, that it's step by step. It's a systematic way of finding out about what our kids need, applying what we think they need, measuring the impact, and then making an adjustment or continuing with that intervention, or maybe even titrating or weaning them off that intervention. So the idea is on the left side, it says student performs below or well below expectations. And that starts this discussion at data team, where that student is brought to the team and for the purpose of solutions, for the purpose of support. On the other side, it says students score average or above. So then we continue that high quality evidence-based instructional practice. But as students move through the process, at the bottom you see, does the student respond to intervention, yes or no? And this is really where a lot of MTSS systems break down. Interventions are put in place, maybe it's November, and then in May we say, oh my gosh, the student didn't do well. We missed the mark. Or the student didn't respond to the intervention, the student didn't take their responsibility. Sometimes we might give that as our rationale. But the fact is that in a system, in a flowchart system where you know what the next step is, you'll be asking those questions every time you get new data. Certainly at report card time, certainly at unit test time, sometimes after the end of a class period when the exit tickets are done. And so the teacher asks the question, is the student responding to the intervention? If the answer is no, back up we go. We need to create a new intervention plan. Maybe we take with us some of the intervention plan we already have so that we get to lean on some of the good progress that's been made. But if we're meeting expectations, we need to do something differently, don't we? And so this is just a flow chart that helps us to understand where the student is in the system, and also to understand how our system works. How is our system designed so that there are checkpoints, so that there's space made to adjust practice, and there's absolutely a plan for monitoring, for pulling in that data, for seeing what the impact of the work we're doing might be. Do you want to say anything else about this, Anna, since a lot of it is your work?
Nope, I think that was perfect. Thank you.
So there is a feedback survey. Do we want to do that, Ellen, in this forum?
Yeah, so we only have a couple more minutes, so I'll just quickly go through these things. And Lisa, thank you so much again for presenting today. And Angelina and Adriana, if you have any other questions, please let us know. We'll make sure to send out the PowerPoint and all of the resources that were shared today so that you'll have access to them. So just a couple of quick follow-up items. We have a feedback survey that if you have time, we'll include this in the email, but any feedback that you have in regards to these forums, we would love to hear. We always want to improve on these and make sure that they're the most intentional and beneficial for everyone that's joining. Resources I mentioned, we'll send in an email, and then we also have a NIG platform where we'll be posting all of the recordings. It's a great place to also have discussions with everyone else on the platform. So there's a hyperlink here to create an account, which will be sent out. Our next meeting date is December 17th. And our next topic will be around the second goal of our advocacy program, goal setting and monitoring. So that's pretty much everything that we have for today. This is our contact information if you have any further questions, and we really appreciate everyone joining today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ellen.
everyone.
Thank you.
And it was recorded. This whole thing was recorded, right? So I
Yes.
can
Yep, and
share
it's
it with
recording.
other
It's
people.
recorded.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep,
Sorry I got
all
on late.
right.
I'll go back. Thank
And
you.
happy
Good night,
holidays
everyone.
if I don't get to see you all or talk to you all. Happy holidays.
You too.
Yeah,
Happy
thank you.
holidays.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ending is okay.